Welcome to the Recruiting Stories podcast, where we celebrate recruiting by exploring the stories of leaders and top performers by digging into their stories and understanding how recruiting has impacted their journey and their success. Okay guys, welcome to episode 11 of the Recruiting Story podcast. This week our guest is Tim Dooner. If you guys don't know who Tim Dooner is, you're living under a rock. He is the voice of transportation and logistics right now over at Freightwaves. He's a director of audio. He's an on-air host and producer for Freightwaves podcast and Freightwaves TV. Probably know him from What the Truck, that podcast, very popular. The Morning Minute, Freightwaves Insider, he's been on and put that coffee down. Freightwaves Radio on Sirius XM. He's all over the place, and so awesome conversation. Just one of those guys who is always entertaining. Like you can't not be entertained, not enjoy talking to him when you get a chance to. We really talked through his recruiting story, right? How he ended up in logistics, how he ended up in podcasting, and kind of what elements and people shaped that story, which is really cool. So definitely listen close there. We also talk about a little bit about his journey with alcoholism and how he's overcome that and kind of what things helped him overcome that hurdle in his life. Including both some of his work, podcasting as a goal, and some great people along the way too. So I think you'll really enjoy this episode. Connect with Tim on LinkedIn. You can connect with Tim on Twitter, and you can find him on the Freightwaves website as well. Everybody, welcome to the Recruiting Stories podcast, powered by Cover 3 Consulting. I'm super excited. We have the one and only Tim Dooner. Tim, how are you?
I'm doing great. Thank you so much for having me on the show, Adrian.
Yeah, man, I'm excited to have you. If you don't know Tim, you have been not paying attention, and you're probably not in the logistics and transportation industry. Obviously, Tim is what I would call like the face of media and podcasting in the logistics industry. Obviously he's with Freightwaves. Tim, would you mind just kind of telling everybody a little bit about you and your role with Freightwaves and the different shows and things that you do over there?
Yeah, at Freightwaves, I'm a content producer. So what I do is I make shows, I make podcasts. And then because of the nature of Freightwaves, where we film all of our stuff, and we built a TV network kind of on the back of a lot of these podcasts, by virtue, I kind of ended up being a big fixture on the TV show as well. Once we started filming one of my shows called What the Truck, which in a lot of ways became a pilot for the network we were building outwards. And I've been doing What the Truck at Freightwaves. Just had my 2-year anniversary a couple months ago. So just
congrats.
Thank you. Just been building it up, making it better. I got a couple other shows I do. I got a morning news report I do. But in general, I produce shows and I talk to a lot of people. I interview about 14 different CEOs, founders. But the other cool thing is that Freightwaves kind of lets me do my thing. So it's not just CEOs and founders on my show. In my opinion, I think I get to tell the real story of freight because we talk to people in college, people who are entry level, people who just got in the business to understand what their first year experience was. We talk to truck drivers. We talk to NASA. We go all across the gamut. And that's really my passion is personalizing and personifying this freight, not just myself, but all of my guests, and telling those stories, those brand stories and those personal journeys of people within this industry.
Well, you do a great job of storytelling, right? I think that's what's obviously your energy, but just you're so compelling at telling stories, not just about the big CEO who had a startup and is incredibly successful, but the truck driver who's been on the job for 10 years to the young guy or gal. And I think that's what's so attractive about you and your brand and what you bring to the table. So kudos to you on the 2 years. I do have to ask, you mentioned like the TV section. How did you see that coming? Obviously, you've been an advocate for podcasting for a while, and something that you've obviously grown and your trajectory has risen. Like, did you see like TV as something you were going to do, or was that like an uncomfortable, like, oh man, I got to be on TV?
It was an interesting progression. So when I was recruited to Freightwaves, we'll get into that story. But when I joined there, it was sort of just, I like what you're doing with this podcast you're doing for a morning company, which is now Freight Plus. Come over here and build a podcast network. So to me, I'm thinking, I'll be in my comfort zone. I'm just making audio podcasts. At the time, I was I was pretty much a purist about it. I'm not natively a video guy. I don't really edit video. I can do like minor clips and multimedia stuff, but not really a video guy. But what happened is when I got into Freightwaves in April of 2019, at the same time, they were trying to build out the Freightwaves TV network, and they had brought in this girl, Emily Zink, to work with us and help put the network together. And her and I ended up working hand in hand and very closely as long as we had both been there. And we started building up Freightwaves TV. They had this show called Freightwaves Now before I got there that they were just filming on a GoPro, and they had the big board. But we really wanted to bring up this production and make it more to where it is today. And today, I think we still want to, grow. And the great thing about Freightwaves is always wanting to push it forward. But I saw a great opportunity. I'm like, okay, I'm on the show What the Truck now, and I have these other shows. Why not make the flywheel? Why not throw a camera in front of us and make that part of the show? And initially, it was really simple. Like we just took, it was like $600 camera called a Mevo, and that can trick you into thinking there's 3 different angles. So it does like a close, and you can do like a zoom in wide shot of the 2 hosts. And just not at first it was easy because they would just put that in the booth with us. So it was like fly on the wall style. As production kind of scaled up, I've always been very protective of like keeping the sound and the nature of podcasting there, and realizing that I'm also talking to an audience that may not be able to see. They might just be walking around listening. So I've always been cognizant of that. But the hardest part was like when they get like the big 4K cameras and you have those in front of you is before the whole point was like fly on the wall, you don't look at the camera at all. And now it's like you have to make eye contact. So you had to train that muscle memory, and it took a little while to get comfortable doing it. But I mean, now it would seem weird to me if I wasn't filming a show.
Yeah, absolutely. I feel like there's probably some, watched News Anchor a few times, or what's the show? I think of the Ron Burgundy. I think of that movie.
Like Anchorman?
Anchorman, yeah. Do some training watching Anchorman, yeah. That's awesome. Well, let's talk about your recruiting story, right? So, everybody has a moment where they get pulled into kind of where they are today, and there's different, pivots that people take or forks in the road. So, like, talk to me about how you first entered into the transportation world, and then maybe at what point did you realize, like, hey, podcasting is something I'm really interested in, and creating media? Like, when did that happen for you?
Yeah. So I started out, like, I went to art school. I went to California Institute of the Arts for music production, music technology.
Are you from Boston or are you from California?
I'm from Boston, but I wanted an excuse to get out of Boston. I found out that California Institute of the Arts had an electronic music program, a music production program. I really wanted to do that. I wanted to go pursue my dreams out in Hollywood. So I went out there, but this was like 1999, 2000, like peak Napster. And I get in the music industry, and it was cool, but it was pretty obvious early on what was going on with downloads and CD sales going down.
Right,
music industry wasn't prepared for it. I'm living in Hollywood. I need to make more money. So after a couple of years, it was like, I got to figure out something else to do. I end up moving back to Boston. And it's funny, my parents had moved out to California. My sister moved out to California. So I pulled a switcheroo on them. I fly back to Boston. Buddy of mine, he was living in Dorchester. He had a room open up in his apartment for like $400 a month. My car lease had just gone up in California. So I fly out there, go to live with him. But after a couple of months, I couldn't get the job I wanted. Like, I really wanted to work for, I believe it's Harmonix that made Guitar Hero. It was either Guitar Hero or Rock Band. Yeah. They're the same thing. But I really wanted to get a job with them. Couldn't get a job with them. Couldn't get a job with anybody that I wanted to get a job with. My dad, he worked at Roanoke Insurance for a long time. So he touched the world of freight forwarding and the world of logistics by offering marine cargo insurance. In fact, he basically is responsible for making marine cargo insurance a thing in Boston. Mm-hmm. He's like, look, man, I ain't going to send you any money. So you got to figure something out. This may not sound like something you want to do, but I know this guy, Bob Keneally, he works over at FedEx Trade Networks. Go down there, go in for an interview and see what happens. And yeah, I'm pretty desperate at the time. And in Dorchester, I don't have a car. I had to take the red line to the orange line to the blue line, then walk a mile every single day to go to this job at FedEx. But that's how I got it. I went in and I interviewed with the guy, and he's like, yeah, $29,000 a year. And this is 2005, $29,000 a year benefits. And one part of my story that might put a little context to this too is at this time, I was also pretty deep in like the throes of alcoholism. So like for me, I'm like, I need path of least resistance. I need a paycheck. I need some health insurance. I need some money to pay for the bottle and my rent, and I'm good. That was like my key to happiness. So that's how I got in. And then you know this industry, it's like a roach motel that you can't get the hell out of it. And in fact, what got me into podcasting is I wanted to do a podcast for a long time. I've been listening to, during that commute I had to do where I take all the trains and walk to work, I was always listening to podcasts. I was listening to Joe Rogan, Adam Carolla, Bill Simmons back in the day. And I thought it was awesome. I thought it was a great medium. But it was more like, I'm a fan of it. I don't want to necessarily do it yet. But then as I was getting into logistics, I tried my hand at operations. I was doing that for a while. So with FedEx Trade Networks, I go to Vandergrift Forwarding. I go to A.N. Deringer, switch over to the sales side. And then as I'm doing sales, I really like, if we had like a podcast in this space, it'd be great because I'm doing all these sales calls to people and it's these cold calls. And like, I feel like in this industry right now, there's not a single good podcast that understands what podcasting is. They all sound like webinars, like ripped audio from zero personality. And they weren't really like, they weren't accessible. Like they always seemed like they were speaking to some specific audience that was at like some level 3 of learning. And I felt like, you know what, there's a great opportunity here. Started to show. And to me, I'm like, look, if I reach out to a CEO and I'm like, hey, can I interview you for a podcast? That felt so much more natural to me than being like, hey, can I come by and sell you some freight? The problem is this company I'm working for, Ocean Air, they had a show. It didn't do well. And it didn't do well because podcasts are bad. It didn't do well because the guy in marketing sucked and he sucked as a host and the show sucked. And, the audio, everything about it sucked. But, it didn't work out. They fired me at that company. My wife was 8 months pregnant. And I went to that alcohol problem still going on. I went to rehab. And when I'm in rehab, I'm like, I got to get control of my life. I also have like clinical depression and I'm like, I need to focus. I need something to care. And I know I got the kid and that's a big thing too, but I need like some sort of personal challenge. And so for me, one of my therapists when I was in rehab was like, well, what's something you really wanted to do that you haven't done that maybe you could use some time just to, get sober, go to meetings, figure it out. And I was like, podcasting. I really want to do that podcast and they wouldn't let me do it Ocean Air. So I called up a buddy of mine in the industry and this guy, Ryan Dooley. Thank you, Ryan. He really encouraged me to start doing the show. And we launched a show together, a podcast. And it, as I suspected, it did really well at first. It was getting a few thousand listens an episode, like right out of the gate. The space, there was such, green field in logistics podcasting at the time. There was nobody doing it on a level to try and make it like mainstream or bigger than just this really niche thing. So I start doing that. This guy, Steve Aborn at Aborn & Company, he starts hearing the show. I try to get a job with them actually as their sales director at this time. And he's like, you don't want to do that. We want you to start writing some blogs for us. And then he started paying me to do podcasts too. So I started having some scratch coming in. That kept me going. And I did that for a couple of years. One day I interviewed Craig Fuller, CEO, founder of Freightwaves, my boss now, mentor, all that kind of stuff. Interview him a week later. Reached out to me on LinkedIn and he goes, you ever want a job in Chattanooga? We got one for you. And the rest is kind of history.
That's wild. So there's a few things that I heard there and there's so many interesting pieces to that, but I'll start with just like some of the people that stuck out. And then I want to talk about, podcasting and then get to, Craig there. But one was like, you're kind of going through this process of like trying to figure life out early on. And, like, what do I do? And as most of us do, like you leaned on your family. Like, I don't know what jobs are out there. I know I was there. I was like, I don't even know what companies do what jobs. And your dad was like, hey, this might be an idea. And so that was a potential turning point where you're like, I guess I'll look into transportation at that point. And then you said your buddy Ryan with a big encouragement at one point in time that said, yeah, go for it. Let's record this podcast. And that changed things. Speak to that a little bit. Just the idea of like somebody else coming alongside of you. Like how important is that? And how important was that for you at that moment to be like, okay, I've got somebody with me to do this rather than like, should I try to go out and completely do the thing on my own?
What was really important about Ryan and what was crucial about him is especially, being kind of in that vulnerable state, having my second kid just being born, really needing something to do, not having a job, not really knowing what direction to go in and really trying to, stay sober and all that kind of stuff. I think having that validation from Ryan coming along and being like, hey, I'll sit next to you. I'll help you get it off the ground and all that stuff. I mean, he left after 9 episodes. Like, God bless him. He was in a master's program and he had a lot going on with work and all that kind of thing. But it was a lot easier after, like, he helped me out for those first 9 episodes, just having someone next to you to be like, I know I can do it with him. Let's find out if I can do it myself. Other than, like, it would have been a lot scarier to just kind of go out there, out in the woods alone. So that was big and crucial. I don't really hold it against him that he took off. Like, I completely get it. And it was great. And, it's the awesome thing about it and why I always feel like it's so tethered to, and I always bring it up, like my sobriety and that is because it is. I mean, I feel that one doesn't exist without the other. They're crucially important to my mental health, my physical health, my spiritual health, and my career growth.
I think that's amazing that you're willing to talk about even the sobriety and the alcoholism in your own story. What a cool thing. And if you guys haven't, I'll link to it. Go listen to Tim's TED Talk. What an awesome story. He goes through some of the details of that and just an incredible encouragement. But I mean, to your point, like physical and mental health, as you're going through those stages, having people alongside you that can encourage you as you take some of those steps is incredibly crucial. And so that's awesome. Definitely go listen to that another time here as well. Let's talk about Craig, right? So you do that interview and just like the power of networking, right? Which you clearly understood early, right? You understood, hey, if I'm going to sell, maybe if I can take this alternative route of saying, hey, not just I want to sell you, a service where we can move your freight, but can I learn from you, right? Can I have a conversation with you? Man, that's such a great way to connect with people. And it's so human, right? Where, you and I can connect. And then if somebody says, hey, you know what, at some point, now that we know one another, maybe we can help one another at some point. That happened with Craig. So tell me a little bit about that process and how you ended up being like, okay, I'm going to go from where I'm at now down into this amazing thing that you guys are doing with Freightwaves and what that's become.
Here's the great thing about like work and experience and life is that it all scales. Like you don't lose your learnings, especially if you stay positive and you keep moving forward. And when I think about a little bit about the road that took me here, a lot of these are just skills I picked up along the way. Going to audio school for production allowed me to create a podcast on my own very quickly. I understood what to do because I already had the background with audio, listening to all those podcasts. I mean, before I ever did a podcast, I listened to thousands and thousands of hours of podcasts. It's my favorite people, just taking notes, taking lessons, learning how they speak, learning how they interview, all of those kind of things. Then when I got into sales in the freight industry, that's when I really started to accelerate my LinkedIn because on LinkedIn, I'm like, freight, not a huge world. People in freight, they're not really treated like superstars, even the CEOs. So it shouldn't really be that hard to get access, especially if you slide into their DMs and you're just like, hey man, I want to know more about you and your business. I want to tell your story. I want to hear your story. I felt like that would kind of work. And what happened is when I was unemployed or working freelance and I was trying to launch this podcast thing and Aborn was paying me as a freelancer, which, they didn't pay me much. I only made $12,000 my first year. We almost went bankrupt. We almost lost my house. It was a very hard first year. And I almost kind of like blank out some of the more difficult parts of it because, it doesn't matter. We persevered. We went through it, but
we made it. Yeah.
I had to write a lot of these news write-ups. And a lot of the news write-ups that I was writing I noticed that in 2017, each time I would search like freight technology, logistics, blog, whatever it was, Freightwaves kept pushing more and more near the top. It was going over sites like JOC, Transport Topics, Lodestar, all those, all the typical ones that you'd see. I'm noticing Freightwaves coming along. And the other thing I noticed about Freightwaves was just like the look of it. I looked at one of their events and I think it was called like Transparency 18 or maybe MarketWaves or something. They had all this LED going on, all these blue lights. And to me, I'd only been to logistics conferences. I'd been to TPM once, but I'd only been to logistics conferences in the Northeast. And there it was like, fluorescent overhead lighting and, everybody poorly dressed and a sausage fest and 98% dudes, middle-aged guys and stale donuts and stale coffee and Danishes and stuff. And I noticed too that nobody paid attention at these conferences, like they're a networking thing, but there's nothing cool. There's nothing exciting about it. And we were getting dunked on by every other industry that got it, and I was so jealous too. I was jealous of like all these startups and all these other industries. I went to this awesome marketing conference that HubSpot puts on in Boston, what is that called? Insight or something like that? Shoot, I forget. It's a really awesome one that they do at the Seaport Center. And I looked at it and I was looking at Freightwaves and I'm like, they really get it. So once Aborn hired me and brought me on to start consulting logistics, I'm starting, initially I was just, doing some informational kind of stuff that really spoke to what Aborn does. And then once I kind of got through all that, I'm like, okay, let's reach out, start interviewing some industry people. And one of my targets right away was Craig Fuller of Freightwaves. And I knew I might have an in because I saw on LinkedIn, he was posting that they had Freight Futures coming out and they're going on this roadshow tour. So I'm like, well, great. He wants to promote this. And there's really not that many avenues. And I'm not competing against any other real podcasts at the moment. So I'll just DM him and see if he'd come on. And he was like, sure, I'll come on your show. And the funny thing is, it almost never happened. The day of the recording, I haven't said, you send me a link, I send you a link. I send him a link to do the recording. Well, it's time to record. I'm like, where is he? Why isn't he showing up? So I call him up and he's like, we did do this by phone. I thought this would be by phone. And I'm like, shit, I don't have this set up to do it by phone. I have a road board now. I could easily hook Bluetooth up and it would take a second. By the time I didn't have that kind of setup going on at all. So I'm like crushed. And I'm like, put the phone down. Immediately, divine intervention comes over my head. And I'm like, no, you know what? I can set up a Google Voice number and I'll open up my audio recorder and I'll speak into the microphone and record it that way. And I'll record this thing on Google Voice and then I'll just dub it in. It might take a while. It might be a pain in the butt, but I'm not going to lose this opportunity because something inside of me is telling me like, you can't screw this up. You got to impress. You got to make it work. Because I knew that they were going to be the king. I knew they were going to take over. And I didn't know that they would hire me like right away. I didn't know that you would extend that offer so quickly. But the goal, sorry, Steve Aborn, the goal was to get over to Freightwaves. I mean, that was the intent. I knew that I had to get there to further my career and do what I'm doing now and really make podcasting this full-time thing and really be an evangelist of it and, be a face of it in the industry.
That's amazing. That's great. Well, it speaks to your your hustle and your creativity to be like, hey, I got to find a way and get it done. I think that alone probably was a testament for Craig to say, hey, you know what? If this is how he's going to handle it, he'll probably handle himself that way with us, which is awesome, which is really cool. So now, I look at what you are doing and what you have done in many ways as really incredible when it comes to personal branding, right? Because in many ways, that there's many people, whether they're a host of a show on Freightwaves, you especially, very visible, right? On LinkedIn, on other platforms, on the podcasting sector. As we think about, obviously I'm in the recruiting space, right? So what we help transportation companies, transportation technology, carriers around the US and Canada hire people. And so people all the time, I'll have candidates all the time ask me about what can I do to make myself more visible or try to get the role I want? For someone who is extremely visible and has built their own brand, how would you respond to them? What advice would you give someone who's like, hey, maybe should I build my own brand? What should I do? Should I also have a resume? What advice would you give somebody?
The bad advice that I would, the sort of lazy advice that I initially would take would I had no luck with recruiters or recruiting out like ZipRecruiter, all of those things. I've never been hired through one of those things. I don't think any of my resumes has ever looked that great. I don't even know if I'm that good in job interviews or any of that. I just had no luck. All of my jobs have basically come from network, from LinkedIn. Some CEO just DMs me, and then because they asked me, and I was either looking or not looking at the time. Being the CEO makes it very compelling. It makes a very compelling case to come in for an interview if they want you. That, especially if you're moving to a place like Chattanooga. But listen to me, that was like a foregone conclusion. When the second Craig was like, "There's a job for you out there," I'm like, I got to make this happen. My wife's a triplet. Her family lives out in Boston. They just had kids. We got kids. So ripping her out of that environment and bringing her down to Chattanooga was not going to be an easy task. Fortunately, we love it out here. It's awesome. There's the airport right here. But for me, in terms of once I'm in the position, I've looked at freight, and freight to me is very boring. Freight marketing had been very boring. Everything was just a picture of a truck, and everybody was in a polo, and everybody was dressed like, they just got out of golfing or something like that. So I'm like, I'm going to go completely opposite of that. And I'm going to speak to the younger founders. I'm going to speak to the younger people entering the industry who understand memes. They understand popular culture. They understand freight. They actually like freight. They want to talk about freight in a casual environment. And the concept for me has always been I want to have the conversations that people are having outside, in the hallway at the event,
Right.
not on the stage, not those super prepared, overly rehearsed things. I want to get to know and hear the stories and talk about like the real issues and the real people in freight. And then in terms of like looking at all of that thing, I was just like, you know what? I just fought like the biggest demon off my back in terms of getting sober. So I'm going to start writing my own ticket a little bit too. And I'm going to be a little bit more forceful and demanding about, how I present myself and what I am. And fortunately, Freightwaves never said, stop to me or anything. They're like, cool. Yeah, he's got a good look. People know his look. He's standing out. So they've never stopped me. And I've just leaned harder and harder into it and pushed the boundaries and see what they'll let me do and let me get away with. And in freight, I mean, if you look around, yeah, it's like, I don't want this to look like anything else, even stuff that's going on in Freightwaves. Like when if I see a show that's getting a little too close to my ship, it's like, you know what? I got to either get bigger or expand wider or start doing something different or turn it up a notch or do something highly competitive like that. And I think that in this thing, and one of the interesting things about it is you're kind of like sort of creating this economy and atmosphere by building these TV networks, this podcasting thing from this ground up, and even this type of B2B media and this way of presenting B2B media within freight. So it's sort of cool. There's no rules that I have to follow, which is fun. So I just listen to the people who watch and listen to me and I communicate with and my peers. And what do you guys like? What do you want? And that's the stuff I'm most receptive to.
Well, I think a couple of things I heard that I love is like, one is like you just created value, right? And if you create enough value and you're visible, people are going to notice, right? And when people notice, then typically opportunity comes. But then the other side of that is just like being relatable and likable. People all the time, like some people don't like this, and the talent acquisition space. But I get some flack for this. But likability is so important. Like being likable is so important, and that doesn't mean like change who you are, like try to be who somebody else wants to be. But a lot of times there's like being kind and then caring about what other people care about, right? So that means rather than, wearing the polos and, trying to act like everybody else is acting, it's like, hey, what do you actually want to talk about, right? What's important to you now rather than, what do I think this CEO is? And should I memorize this marketing copy that I've heard rather than like, hey, let's make a joke about what's going on in the industry, with everything being, backed up and, in the Suez Canal or what have you. Like those things are far more relatable and can catch my eye than, really technical speak.
No, yeah, I agree with you. I agree with you 100% here. And I think that makes sense because you look at something like the Morning Brew and what they do, and I think that they do a very successful way of presenting the news in this very sort of casual way. And I don't think that in our industry, we had really done a great job of presenting freight news in a much more casual environment and a much more conversational and talkative environment and memeable environment and those kind of things. But freight is this incredibly interesting world. There's this massive transformation going on. And, and it's cool because I also have that perspective of when I came in this industry when I was 26 or when I was going to college, there weren't a ton of supply chain programs for students. There wasn't a ton of interest. And most people who have ended up in this industry fell into it backwards or by accident, or they backed into it, or it's a second lease on life. And one of the things that makes this industry awesome because of that is you have these really great comeback stories of people who, they thought they'd be somewhere else in life. They found this, they embraced it, and now they love freight. And one of the things that I also know about freight, because I've been doing it for a while, is that you can't talk to anybody about this stuff who doesn't work in the industry. So you need forum style discussions. You need podcasts that foster those kind of conversations. So the voices in your head and the conversations you have in the head with yourself, you will feel validated too. You're like, it's hilarious. I was just thinking about that. Or yeah, that's going on. I want to hear a little bit more. That doesn't mean you need like the exact statistical breakdown of every mode of transportation, because that can get really boring. I think that there's a niche and an opportunity to just talk in sort of broader general terms about just some of the stuff we face. And you said something there that jogged my memory, and it was that likability and that conversationalness. And I think that the way I produce shows is much different than what I would have done if I made the mistake of starting podcasting before I got sober, when I was much more negative, much more depressed. And one of the things that I did, sea change in my mind, that I've worked very hard on and still work very hard on is focusing on positive energy, because I think that energy manifests itself. And I don't want to sound like a Zen guru, but it does. If you focus on negative outcomes, you will personally validate those things in your mind. And if you focus on positive ones, you will strive for those outcomes too. And you will validate all the good things that went there, because we don't like to be wrong. So try to be right about something that's good and good natured. And I think that's worked well in this industry. I think that in B2B media, if I was overly cynical, overly attacking every single thing I can for the low-hanging fruit or the cheap likes or that kind of stuff, I don't think I'd be as successful. That might work in some other media, but I think in
Fox
this space,
and CNN and stuff like that.
Yeah, I hate that. Like, I don't watch cable news. I can't stand it. I can't stand like the fake manufactured outrage. Yeah. I try to stay out of it. Like, let's be kind of level-headed about it and hear the real good stories and what makes people work.
No, that makes a ton of sense. And I appreciate that as well. I wanted to kind of ask you about that. So you've talked about, going through the throes of alcoholism. Do you mind talking a little bit about that, of kind of like what helped bring you out of that, and kind of your story there? Do you mind giving us a blurb on that?
Yeah, Ocean Air, thank you so much for firing me. It's the best thing you could have ever done, even though it didn't feel that way at the time. But the reason I knew I had to get sober, and it wasn't the first time I've been in rehab. In 2009, I went to rehab for a stint as well. But at that time, my biggest problem was I was like, I just wanted to prove I could stay sober for 90 days, which I did. Then on the 91st day, I bought a bottle of Jack Daniels. And that was also on the encouragement of this girl. So do what you can have to keep bad influence out of your life when you're trying to get sober people. But this time, so what happened is they fired me at Ocean Air, and I'm like, awesome, great, because they gave me my last paycheck, live money, right in hand. And I'm like, I'm going to go and buy, a half gallon of Tito's. I'm going to go buy some soda water, and I'm just going to get trashed. I'm sitting in my car, and this is my thought. I'm not even upset. I'm like, hell yeah, hallelujah, plenty of time to get hammered. If I'm hungover the next day, I don't got to worry about going to the job or anything. Mind you, my wife is pregnant. We're about to have another kid. But you know what? Didn't faze me. Like, I got home to cope with it. I think I drank for about like 10 days straight. I was just obliterated. And that was nothing new. Like, from 18 onwards, aside from that 90-day break, I was pretty much drinking every single day of my life, and pretty excessively, especially when I was getting deep into the vodka and that Tito's and soda water. And what happened is, after like 10 days, I was starting to get really, really depressed, really, really low. And visibly, like, it's not like I was even getting drunk anymore. It was like, I visibly had it and I was feeling sick. And a buddy of mine, a mentor of mine, who, when I was at a record label I met, he said to me, I knew that he had gotten sober. So in the middle of the night, and I was drunk, like 3 a.m, I wrote him an email and I was like, hey, I'm going to tell my parents and my wife that they need to take me to rehab no matter what. And if I don't do that, here's their numbers. Can you make that happen for me? I am drunk right now and I might regret this tomorrow. I won't regret it for the rest of my life. And I sent him that email. And I did. I was still up that night when my wife got up, and I was like, hey, I need like one more day. Tomorrow, let's go into rehab. Can you help me find a place? And we did. And we looked into it, and we found out that my health insurance was still active. So there's this place called McLean where Girl Interrupted was based at. It's pretty well-known place in Boston. It's not like what is that called? That really like Sandals. What is Sandals? I know Sandals is a resort. Whatever Passages in Malibu. It's not like that. It's not like $30,000 a day or something. But it's this dual diagnosis facility for mental health and for alcoholism or drug addiction. And that was super beneficial, And this time I took it seriously because I admitted to myself the fact that I am an alcoholic, that I got to be kind of binary with something like that. And I got to turn that 1 to a 0, stay the hell away from it, and focus on what can be good about life. And that's where I got in there. Like I said, that therapist, I told him I did improv back in like 2010 as a way to get over social anxiety and how much I like podcasting. And I was trying to do this podcast. He was like, we should still do it. And it made sense to me because I'm like, at worst, it's going to act as a resume for my knowledge. And my regular resumes weren't doing well. So at least this will. And no one wanted to hire me in marketing because I didn't have marketing experience. I wanted to get out of sales. I didn't want to get back into ops or marketing. And I'm like, my best inroad, my best chance is just to start podcasting. And that's what I did.
That's amazing. How important is it, just gonna, I mean, now, hearing you talk about it, you're open with it and saying, hey, this is true. This is a part of me. This is how I've overcome it at this point in time. Like, how important is both that being honest with yourself and then the accountability side? Like, those are two things I've heard you talk about a few times. Like, how important are those two things in that process?
I mean, they're very important, but like, it's also just mentally, you have to know that something is like this dragon you've sealed in the well, and like you just can't touch it. You have to turn it off. Like, I don't eat fish, so to me, like, alcohol is now fish. Like, if I'm sitting at a bar, I'm not even looking at the alcohol. I'm not really tempted or anything like that, because it's just not something I touch. Instead, I'm looking at like the soda fountain or something like that. So you have to be sort of strict about it, but at the same time, behaviorally, like I think I've rewired myself well enough that I've been able to stay away from it and not really be attracted back to alcohol, fortunately.
That's awesome. That's cool. Well, huge testimony to you and obviously the success that you've had in addition to just overcoming that as well. When you think of kind of where you're going from here, right? Obviously, you've had a ton of success when it comes to podcasting media, what you're doing with Freightwaves. I haven't really asked a lot of people this on my podcast yet, but like, what do you want to do next? Is there anything that you, from like a media standpoint, or what I want to create one day? If there's something that you're like, man, that's where I want to go one day when it comes to just like what you want to create, as someone who I would look at and say, man, highly creative, highly talented in that area.
I think that we have so much runway here at Freightwaves still. We have so much more to build, so much more to do. I know that, like, from the outside looking in, some people look and they're like, oh, it looks polished and stuff. And in some ways it is, but we're still a startup. We're not Bloomberg. We're getting there. We're jumping over all the other logistics, and those kind of things. But I want to make freight mainstream. I want to make this much bigger than what it is. And every day my goal is to push that forward. And I think that if I wasn't feeling like we were pushing that boulder uphill, the second it starts rolling downhill, I think that that's when I might change direction or want to do something else. But right now, I feel like we're growing so much. So I'm getting that workout in, and I feel like I'm contributing, and I'm a bit like I have a lab, and I feel like a worker dog, like my lab. And as long as the ball's there to chase and run after, and I feel like it's going to go further and further, and I can bring it back, then I'm interested and I'm engaged and I'm excited. And fortunately, Freightwaves has afforded me that opportunity that they allow me to do so much on my own, and they allow me to explore my own creativity and almost work like an entrepreneur in terms of what I want to do with What the Truck or Freightwaves Insiders or any of the other shows or interests that I have. There's been that opportunity. One of my dreams though, like, I'm a big fan of ID Discovery. I want to get killed in like a reenactment of a murder. I think that would be cool. Or like, I want to be I want to be killed in a horror movie.
Mm-hmm. I heard there was one called Karen coming out that you were telling me about.
Yeah, I want to get killed in the sequel to Karen.
Go check that out after the show, everyone.
It looks terrible. I don't know if you've seen the trailer yet. It looks like a Saturday Night Live digital skit. It's getting ripped apart on Twitter right now, that Karen trailer. It's probably not what we need, but I'm happy that the reaction by most people isn't to fight over it, but it's to like come together and make fun of how sort of over the top and preposterous this trailer and movie is.
Whoever hears this, whatever we can do to get Dooner on Karen 2 as a cameo.
Please not Karen.
Please.
What about like a Nightmare on Elm
something else.
I want to get killed by Jason Voorhees, not by Karen.
I'll say, like A Quiet Place 3. Something, I don't know, something would be cool. But well, cool. But as we wrap up, couple thoughts come to mind here. Obviously, love your story, love your authenticity, love what you do on Freightwaves. If you were talking to like your 20-year-old self, or someone who might be in your shoes as a young person starting their career, whether that's podcasting, marketing or transportation, what advice would you look back based off of where you've been and where you are now, and what would you give them?
Well, I would say 20-year-old Tim, 20-year-old Dooner, you're in Hollywood, you're working for this record label, you got a good opportunity. Maybe you should put the plug in the jug and stop drinking. So that's the first thing I would tell myself. The second thing is, I don't know. Like, look, a butterfly flaps its wings. I don't want to mess with the butterfly effect. I got a good life. I love my kids. I love my wife. None of this would have happened if every single thing in my life didn't happen, I wouldn't be where I am. Life is just these small little circumstances, these smallest little things, the inconsequential things, a DM to Craig Fuller, figuring out a little problem from Craig Fuller, taking the opportunity from Craig Fuller to come out here, or back even before that, Steve Aborn saying, hey, I know it's not a lot of money, but you want to do some freelance stuff for us. Taking that, using that to put the oxygen in my tank. Even my wife is weird. My wife, I don't necessarily know if I believe in fate, but I believe in energy. And my wife and I, we used to work like in Hollywood. We worked like 100 yards from each other, never ran into each other. We've been to some of the same concerts together in both Massachusetts and California before we ever met each other. And then like randomly on OkCupid, we did like in 2010, years later. But you can't change it. I don't know. You can't change it. I'm glad the sperm who made me one. I'm glad the sperm who made my kids one. I'm glad you can't say what if it did, what if it didn't. So 20-year-old me, I'm glad you made it. You were an idiot. You did some really stupid things. You could have made better choices. I think that I wasted time. I think that I didn't believe in myself enough. I think that I used alcohol way too much as a crutch. I think I blamed too many other people. I thought other people were responsible for my circumstances. And the biggest sea change was realizing that you got to focus on the positive outcomes. You have to have a goal. You've got to move towards it. And you can't expect that outcome to happen overnight. You have to have perseverance. You have to work for it. You got to get back up. You're going to get knocked back on your ass. You got to stand back up and keep going, moving forward if you really want it. And I know that you hear that from everybody, and people want to dismiss that advice because it isn't like, lose 30 pounds in a month type of advice. I mean, like, this is every day. Every day I have to work hard to push What the Truck forward, to push myself forward, to push what Freightwaves is doing forward, to push my coworkers forward. All those kind of things is work that you got to come to the table. You got to just do it. You got to come up to the plate.
But one of the things I love about what you're saying there is like, also don't underestimate the little thing, the little moment, that one DM that can change the course of your life as long as you're continuously moving forward. Right? Those little things that might seem inconsequential at the time, they may end up when you look back, be like, wow, who knew that would have changed so much had I not done that little thing, had I not put forth that effort in that moment, Well,
it's like those negative lessons too. Those negative lessons, Adrian, I think that the way you can receive them and the way you can act upon them is when you get over blaming other people, when you get over blaming the world and blaming other stories and looking for external forces. And when you internalize a little bit and say, you know what, look, from other people's perspectives, I probably did screw up here. I probably wasn't nearly as good as I thought I was, or I wasn't as good an employer, or good a friend, or good a lover, or good a person. All those things, once you get past that stuff and you go, you know what, a lot of this is me. A lot of this is me and my own projections and my own fears, my own bullshit. And I got to take some lessons from this. And when you do, that's when you can start scaling all that knowledge. And I was a late bloomer. It took me a while to do that. It really took me getting sober to really accelerate and do that and come to that realization. So I think the best advice I can really give is don't be overly hard on yourself, right? Understand the lessons that come to you. Take the punches that come to you, but realize why you got hit. Maybe you didn't have your glove, So next time, keep your gloves up and come back. And you know what? When you come back, hit twice as hard.
Yeah, learn from the mistakes. Make mistakes, that's fine, but learn from them. Absolutely, that's good. What books? Any book that you ever read in your life that you're like, hey, that was extremely influential, or that helped kind of change my trajectory?
So
it could be a comic book.
No, so my kids are 6 and 4. So like I read like 300 books a year, but they're all by like Shel Silverstein, and they're like Where the Wild Things Are and Neverending Story and stuff like that, and Willy Wonka and the Chocolate Factory. So I mean, but that stuff's highly influential to me because I really like the creativity within children's books, and I really like talking to my kids and telling them stories and having to tell them ways in concise and succinct ways. So I think children's books have really been influential, but I'm not much of a reader. I have really bad ADHD. So I read voraciously, but like I'm reading Twitter, I'm reading LinkedIn threads, I'm reading Reddit, I'm reading articles online. So unfortunately, maybe it makes me sound dumb, maybe it doesn't, but I just don't read a lot of books, dude.
Fair enough. No children's book that you're like, man, that one has a great message.
I mean, you can't go wrong with Charlie and the Chocolate Factory, can you? I mean, it's a great lesson about, they have this great opportunity. Like, I always sort of feel like a parable of my life. It's great. You get this golden ticket. You get to go in the factory. And all you got to do is not drink that fizzy lifting drink and get caught in those turbine blades. And then maybe Willy Wonka or Craig Fuller will give you some keys to the chocolate factory.
Just don't drink the fizzy lifting drink. Just don't do it.
Don't take the everlasting gobstopper. I'm not going to take your everlasting gobstopper, Craig Fuller.
So I saw this, I think it was a meme the other day, and it was like, actually, Willy Wonka's grandparents had it really great. Like, they never got out of bed. Like, they were just constantly stuck in bed. Like, somebody had to feed them. Like, I never thought about that until I read that. And I was like, that's a fascinating point. What did they do?
Grandpa, and then he's dancing the second he finds out they got a ticket. Like, complete layabout. What a joke. I would tell my 20-year-old self, don't be Grandpa Joe.
Don't be Grandpa Joe. Absolutely. Cool. Well, Tim, man, I appreciate your insight. I appreciate you telling us about your story, just being honest and authentic with all of that. If people want to connect with you, they want to check out What the Truck, learn more about you, where should they go?
There's a few different ways. You could email me, tdooner@freightwaves.com. That's DOONER. Twitter, I'm probably most active on @Timothy Dooner. Again, DOONER. Find me on LinkedIn, Timothy Dooner. I'm not hard to find, right? I'm a pretty accessible guy.
Google him. He's all over the place.
Google. Well, if you want my shows too, What the Truck, look it up wherever you get podcasts. You want to watch it. It's Mondays, Wednesdays, Fridays, live at noon Eastern time on Freightwaves TV. There's an app for that, or go to tv.freightwaves.com or watch it on LinkedIn. I got another show, one-on-one career journey type of show, brand journey type of show called Freightwaves Insiders. That's out every Thursday. Last one was with Hyliion's Thomas Healy. Super cool guy. What you'll learn about him is that he was a 6'5", 245-pound punter, which is way too big to be a punter. And on top of that, he's building, multi-billion-dollar, EV retrofitting company, which is what Hyliion does. So super cool. But then we also talk to truck drivers. I mean, we talk to everybody. I like talking to people. If you're in supply chain logistics or interested in getting into supply chain logistics, you got a good story, you want to write your next story, talk to me. Happy to hear it.
Reach out to Tim. As a free safety who is like 6'2", 205, that's not a punter that I would want to mess with.
That's what I'm saying, man.
Looks like a D end. That's crazy. All right, Tim, thanks so much for your time, man. I appreciate you being on.
Thanks, Adrian. Appreciate it.
Thanks for listening to the Recruiting Stories podcast. If you haven't yet, subscribe wherever you listen to podcasts. Check us out on LinkedIn, Adrian Chapman, and Cover 3 Consulting is our company page. Also check out our website, www.cov3consulting.com. Again, thanks for joining us, and we just simply want to remind you that you can change the world by putting people in a position where they can do the most good, and you do that by recruiting. Thanks again for joining us. We'll see you next time.